Hello and welcome to this week's Culture Report. I'm Jamal Simon.
I'm DeMarco Randall.
And I'm Antonia Velez.
Oh, and we have a lot going on today. So as we know, we're less than 2 months away from the 2024 presidential election. And this week, we're making sure that all of you have what you need before hitting the polls. So today, we're joined by our 9 News political reporter, Marshall Zellinger. Thank you so much for coming. He's going to let you guys know where the candidates stand on significant issues. So, and Drs. Sarah Chatfield and Jesse Acevedo from Denver's University of Denver's Department of Political Science are also here to highlight how some of those policies on some of the biggest issues would impact votes. So thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. And Marshall is just going to be a couple steps away from this set to kind of give us a rundown on these issues, but he will be right back to join these conversations. So Marshall? All right, now let's get started. Foreign policy was one of the issues that took center stage at the most recent presidential debate, namely regarding international conflicts such as the Russo-Ukrainian and Israel-Hamas wars. Marshall, could you give us a brief overview of where candidates have said they stand on these conflicts and what their proposals are in terms of U.S. involvement?
Sure, I'm glad I made it so fast so I don't have to breathe really fast. At last week's debate, former President Trump said he wants a deal done to end the Russia-Ukraine war, but never said he wants Ukraine to win. Previously, he has praised Russian President Vladimir Putin. On the Israel-Hamas conflict, Trump has defended Israel, but last spring said that Israel was losing the PR war and needed to get the war over fast. Vice President Kamala Harris said she will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself and ensure it has the right to do so. It's not quite clear what she means because she has also said she supports a two-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians. Harris was criticized by Palestinian supporters for not giving their side a speaking ability at the DNC. At the DNC, Harris said she would stand strong with Ukraine, but there was little specific beyond that, beyond also supporting NATO allies.
All right, and now to an issue that's definitely top of mind for a lot of Gen Z voters, climate change. So have either candidates proposed any policies that would help reduce its impact?
Harris touts that she was the tie-breaking vote in the Senate for the Inflation Reduction Act, which put a focus on climate change and electrification. That also included $140 million in home energy rebates for Coloradans to electrify their homes. There's still a question on her switch on fracking, though. While running for president back in 2019, she said she would ban fracking on public lands. She no longer takes that stance, though oil and gas permits on public lands are much lower today under a Biden-Harris administration than under former President Trump. To answer your question specifically for Trump, no. Trump has previously said he wants to get rid of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. He wants to increase oil and gas production on public lands, and more access to public lands is something those with the ear of President Trump are pushing. His former Bureau of Land Management acting director told me he wants to see more oil and gas leases on public lands and more access for recreation versus conservation.
Additionally, the annual inflation rate as of July 2024, is at 2.9% compared to 1.4% when the Biden administration first took office. Nearly a quarter of Americans are concerned about housing costs, job availability, and the price of food, just to name a few. Marshall, what are some of the policies that the candidates are looking to utilize to strengthen the economy and ease the burden falling on most Americans?
It depends on how much you earn, DeMarco. Trump's economic plan calls for a tax rate system that would raise the taxes currently paid by people and families that earn fewer than $168,000, and it would lower taxes paid by those who make more than $168,000. He also has called for the elimination of taxes on tips. Trump also wants to impose tariffs on other countries that tax U.S. exports and to create a baseline tariff on imports. That could hurt Colorado farmers who export their products, resulting in a higher cost. Part of Trump's economic plan calls for ending wasteful government spending, but there are not enough specifics to know what or how much that could benefit the economy. Harris wants to provide down payment assistance for first-time homeowners, additional tax deductions for new businesses, and tax credits for parents of newborns, but those would require help from Congress. Part of her payment plan to cover those costs would be increased taxes on wealthier Americans and on businesses. Like Trump, she also wants to end taxes on tips. And you hear talk, as you mentioned, both candidates talk about grocery bills and the high cost of groceries. It's a staple of Harris's speeches, but I have not heard how those grocery bills would be reduced.
Thanks so much, Marshall. Now, according to Pew Research, this is the issue voters care about the most this year. How might voters' backgrounds inform why they care about this issue, and how could certain policies have different impacts across communities in the U.S.?
So the economy typically is one of the most important issues in any election. But what's been so odd about this election cycle has been kind of this divergence of the positive economic performance that the country has experienced in recent years, but the kind of pessimism American voters have. And this is something that's happened since the pandemic. Before the pandemic, American sentiments about the economy was aligned with economic performance. Since the pandemic, it has diverged. And funny enough, it's only the United States where we're seeing this divergence. No other countries are seeing this divergence. So this is something that's kind of odd, and we don't know whether it's because of polarization, whether it's elite cues, whether politicians are telling voters how to think about the economy, or the way the media has presented economic news in recent years. So that's one. Second, we usually look at economic performance on the performance for the incumbent party in the election, and typically it's one of the most strongly correlated factors. However, since the Obama presidency, that correlation has gotten weaker and weaker. So in a sense, we're kind of seeing this polarization of attitudes where the economy is mattering less and it's more about partisanship.
Interesting.
Yeah, and one thing I always think about with the economy is, regardless of those national level indicators, I think in Colorado specifically, particular segments of the economy like housing costs have this huge impact that may not be completely captured by the interest rate or the GDP, these big numbers we look at. I know for myself, we bought our house about 7 years ago, and it's a house we would not be able to buy today if we were moving to Colorado. And so I think those type of things are a big thing to voters as well. If they're looking at the housing market and saying, oh gosh, I didn't get in at the right time, and therefore I'm never going to be able to afford to buy a house in Denver. And even if the economy is doing well, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can afford everything that you need or want.
Right. That makes sense. Marshall, do you have anything to add?
Well, on that note, I wonder how much of this plays into a voter. I know in Colorado it may not matter for the race for president, but when you look at housing costs, like a lot of that currently, property taxes, which is a basis of state policies. And so I wonder voters taking that into account when they go to the ballot, like they're possibly conflating like something that is not really a White House decision or an impact from the White House versus what is done locally. And when we look at historically of Colorado, I don't think it's going to be a question of who's going to win in Colorado for president. But I wonder if some voters will hold that perhaps against the candidate saying, oh, I'm paying more for this and I'm going to blame that person, not knowing it really doesn't have anything to do with the president.
Yeah, and they may not see the bigger context there too, where, Colorado property taxes are some of the lowest in the nation. But if your personal property taxes have risen dramatically, you may not be having that comparison to, oh, if I owned this house in Chicago, I'd be paying twice or three times as much.
Right.
Well, so happy we have professionals here. Thank you guys so much for that.
This is lovely.
Gun violence in particular has plagued America, especially in recent years. The Gun Violence Archive shows there have been nearly 400 mass shootings in the country this year alone, and the issue has been magnified after an assassination plot and attempt on former President Trump's life. So, Marshall, does either candidate have a plan in place right now to specifically combat gun violence?
A lot of what Kamala Harris wants to see around gun violence prevention would require legislation from Congress, not something she alone could do. You're going to hear me say that a lot. She would seek a so-called assault weapon ban and universal background checks, which already exist in Colorado. She also supports red flag legislation where a court can temporarily order weapons taken from someone deemed to be a threat to themselves or others. Again, that currently exists in Colorado. Her campaign website also talks about investing in federal law enforcement, which would also require help from Congress. As for Trump, simply put, Jamal, he would not seek or sign legislation to put more gun restrictions in place.
And Americans tend to believe that crime numbers are up, even when official data shows a downward trend. Around 6 in 10 American adults say that reducing crime should be a top priority for the president. Marshall, are there certain types of crime that voters may be concerned about? And how do the candidates plan to continue the downward trend we're seeing?
I'm going to guess, DeMarco, that they're concerned about crime that they perhaps see on the news or crime that happens in their neighborhood or that they see on Nextdoor or Facebook. Former President Trump combines his solutions for crime with completing the border wall and making the border more secure. He also uses the term migrant crime as though migrants are to blame for crime rates. He said this at the debate last week. A recent study by the Libertarian Cato Institute looked at crime rates over 10 years in Texas and found native-born Americans were arrested and convicted at a higher rate than migrants with and without documentation. Trump has made statements suggesting he'll focus on criminally going after political enemies also. However, on crime, Harris, on the other hand, has focused on her history as Attorney General of California when there was an increase in felony convictions. I have seen some discussion of spending more money on reintroduction from incarceration to help rehabilitate criminals and prevent them from reoffending. And Harris points to her gun violence prevention policies that we've talked about that could also have an impact on crime.
All right, and that your answer flows perfectly into this next question. Data from Pew Research Center shows that immigration is among the top 10 issues for voters in the 2024 election, with around 6 in 10 people saying immigration is important to their vote. Now, this is a rise from what we saw in the previous presidential election, especially for Republicans. What are some of the immigration policies that each candidate supports, Marshall?
Well, let's start with Kamala Harris. She wants to bring back a border bill that would have funded more Border Patrol agents and provided funding for dealing with fentanyl being brought across the border. That bill did not go anywhere, largely because Trump encouraged Republicans in Congress to back away from it ahead of this election. At the DNC, Harris said she wants to see an earned pathway to citizenship and called the border broken, but is yet to explain how she would address what the Biden-Harris administration has not done so far. Trump has called for the mass deportation of those here without documentation, though it's not clear how that would be completed. Would he call on the National Guard? Perhaps try to get Republican-friendly law enforcement to assist in a federal issue? Unknown. He continues to call for the building of a border wall that was a prominent part of his 2016 campaign that he failed to complete. He would also ban automatic citizenship for children born in America to parents without documentation. He has also called for allowing green cards for foreign-born students who have completed college degrees in the United States.
So as we know, immigration has been a big topic. It certainly dominated the latest presidential debate, where we heard some inaccurate claims regarding immigrant populations in cities like Springfield and here in Colorado and Aurora, and they have all made national headlines. So how might misinformed discourses impact migrant communities, and how could that sway voters? Everyone.
So an important way to think about the immigration debate is it's often two dimensions that I think it's overlooked by a lot of people, but we actually see the parties kind of move around this two dimensions. One is entry. So this is where actually both parties look the same. They both want to restrict the border. People forget that the wall was built a lot during the Clinton and Obama years. Obama still has the highest deportation rate of any presidency. The funding for Border Patrol keeps increasing and increasing. This is a bipartisan agreement. One of the very few is on border enforcement. But where the parties are disagreeing is the integration of migrants. And this is where typically both parties have been, where the Republican Party has been more split. You could think of the George Bush Republicans that had favorable policies towards immigrants. But then Trump has kind of consolidated this anti-integration of immigrants, and you see that through the deportation promises he wants to do. This is where the Democrats could really get at the Republicans, because we know pathway to citizenship is popular. We know that work permits are popular. We know that integrating immigrants is, in public opinion, popular amongst Americans. So this is where you see the divergence between Democrats and Republicans, is how do you best integrate immigrants into the country? And this is where oftentimes Republicans often have to backpedal, because if they go too hard on the deportation, the worry is that's going to have a spillover effect for even migrants with documentation. Research has shown that when communities engage, when local police departments engage with ICE to deport, that hurts crime later, that hurts health outcomes for immigrants. It has these massive spillover effects. There's also been really cool studies that show that when you have high levels of deportation, that hurts wages for U.S. workers. So this has incredible spillover effects that, this is where Republicans really don't want to talk about it too much, but what makes Trump so different is that he's doubled down on it in ways that we haven't seen before. And this has allowed Democrats to kind of move that debate of immigration towards integration, but the Republicans want to pull it back to border entry. So this is kind of the interesting dynamics that we're seeing right now. And we're kind of seeing the Republican Party now consolidating on immigration in ways that they used to be split before. And the Democrats have, I think it looks like they're getting more comfortable at being of talking about their border enforcement policies, which the Democratic presidents have done since the 90s. But now having both, you could be border enforcement and protect immigrants already here. And it looks like the Democrats are really consolidating on that message, which they would be reluctant to do in the past.
And on the misinformation piece, I'll add, there's the potential impact on voters, but I think what I see is that there's a lot of damage done to immigrant communities regardless of the election outcomes. Now, before November, and then after November, these issues are going to remain with us because we're still going to have immigrant communities. And we're already seeing in Springfield that as a result of lies being spread about Haitian migrants there, that people are facing violence, bomb threats, really serious consequences. And so I think that's maybe a little bit separate from the election. Obviously, it's happening in the context of a campaign, but seeing this misinformation be spread not just online, but from the highest levels of the Republican Party, that's really a concern to me, regardless of what happens in November.
Absolutely, that makes sense, Marshall. Go ahead.
Just to add on that, I think what makes this fascinating is, I tend to look at this through an international lens, and what we've seen in the UK, what we've seen in the German elections, the Dutch elections, and the French elections, and the Spanish elections of last year, is that parties have gotten punished for going too hard on the anti-immigration issue in Europe. The question is, will we see that backlash in November? That remains to be seen, but we'll find out soon.
I mean, I look at it from two ways. The political way is you're talking to specific states with your policies. Let's be honest about what 6, 7, 8 states could determine the election. And so it's incumbent on us as journalists to make sure that lies, mistruths, misrepresentations are debunked and shared widely, the debunk of it, and the truth, what we are reporting, should be shared widely so that voters in the states where these points are being made for. So when you talk about like Springfield and Aurora, it's not, I mean, talking about Aurora in a lie is not for Colorado voters, because Trump is not going to win Colorado. He may come visit now because he's talked about it, to then show the voters in the swing states where he really needs those voters to hear his message, whether it's true or not. He needs those voters to like buy into that. And so it's incumbent on us as journalists to make sure that the honest truth behind what's being said is shared with those same voters. So that's what I mean by like the two sides is one, journalists, and then what the politicians are doing, or they're talking to specific states to sway just enough voters to get the electoral votes they need.
Yeah, and then I think to add on that, thinking about the Electoral College, one of the fascinating things we see in the statistics of politics and immigration is that states where immigrants make up a large share of the population, they highly support the Democrats. So thinking about November, let's think, this is where like Arizona and Nevada kind of fit in. These are states where immigrants make up a big share of the population. But then when you think about states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, even though their shares of the immigrant population is not as big, they've seen a big increase in the immigrant population, and that is correlated with Republican votes. So this is kind of like the game that politicians are playing, and this is like a calculation that, I don't know if this is the calculation Trump is doing, that using those stories of Springfield and Aurora, is it a way to sway those Midwestern states to give them the perception that immigration's so high, but that won't fly in a place like Nevada and Arizona, where historically they have large immigrant populations.
And if that's true, if we are in Colorado debunking what's being said about Aurora, is that happening in Michigan and Pennsylvania?
Exactly.
Are those journalists sharing what's being said because, it's Springfield, it's Aurora, that's not a city in our state, but it's messages to those voters, and those voters need to hear what's really happening.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to, sorry, I'm just like adding more layers. If I'm a voter that doesn't live in Colorado, I don't know what Aurora is. Maybe someone will say it's a suburb of Denver. Oh, it's a suburb. I'm used to thinking about immigrants in big cities. Yeah. But if I'm hearing these stories that in Springfield or Aurora, which we don't think of as major migrant destinations, that's probably why we're seeing this like traction of this new story blow up. Because if something like that were to happen in Los Angeles, it wouldn't be a big deal, right? And this reminds me of this strategy that Trump has used on the story of Venezuelans in Aurora and Haitians in Springfield, Ohio. Reminds me of the MS-13 rhetoric from 10 years ago, of Salvadoran gangs in Virginia and Long Island. It's almost the same. You're giving this story of people that have no idea what these communities are, and it gives them this perception that, oh, there's too many migrants or migrant criminals, even though the data shows they're less likely to commit crime and so on and so forth.
We could probably have a whole episode dedicated to this topic, but we do have at least one more big topic to get to. So, Marshall, put on
Back
your
to
running
the
shoes.
monitor.
Put on your running shoes. All right, so right now, the American Civil Liberties Union is tracking more than 500 anti-LGBTQ bills in the U.S. this year, so many of which target trans-identifying Americans. Marshall, have either candidates taken a stance on any issues that would uniquely impact queer voters?
The letters LGBTQ and plus do not show up once in the platform for former President Donald Trump. He has called for punishments for teachers and educators that allow talk about gender neutrality. In a campaign video, Trump said, quote, "If any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will face severe consequences, including the elimination of federal school funding." Part of his platform also includes keeping men out of women's sports, a reference to transgender participation in women's sports. Harris, as Attorney General of California, refused to defend a state ban on same-sex marriages that was put in place by voters. When it was overturned by the courts, she made sure county clerks were allowing same-sex marriages and even officiated herself. There has been criticism of Harris from the LGBTQ+ community for being silent on the T. During the DNC and the recent debate, Harris did not proactively talk about the transgender community, though it appears she supports LGBTQ+ rights, even if silent on the T. Her website says she will fight to put more LGBTQ+ anti-discrimination protections for that community in healthcare, housing, and education, but does not specify how, which, as you've heard me say, would require Congress to act.
Thank you, Marshall. About half of the U.S. adults say that the country's public education system is heading in the wrong direction. Some Democrats point to insufficient school funding and resources, while some Republicans cite a lack of focus on core academic subjects. Marshall, what are some of the strategies that either administration may utilize to help students get ahead if elected?
Well, Harris's platform calls for making higher education more affordable moving forward. Looking back, she has supported the Biden-Harris administration attempt to forgive student debt, which has been challenged in the courts. If she were president, she would also increase a focus on HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and Hispanic-serving institutions, HSIs, which Colorado has 13 of. Trump has also called to make higher education more affordable, but said his way would be through alternatives to a traditional four-year college degree. A lot of his education plan focuses on parental rights in schools, choice for parents, and punishment, as I mentioned, for teachers and institutions that discuss critical race theory and gender neutrality.
All right, Marshall, last question. In June of 2022, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, reversing the nearly half-a-century-old ruling that protected a federal and constitutional right to abortion. Now, since then, nearly 24 states have banned or restricted access to this procedure. What does each candidate envision for the future of abortion access in the United States?
Well, Harris has said she wants to see Roe v. Wade back in place, which allows for abortions. She has also said she would not sign an abortion ban if Congress sent her one, which does not seem likely. And she said she would sign an abortion access law, which Congress is also unlikely to send to her. Trump, however, not calling for a national abortion ban. He takes credit for putting Supreme Court justices in place to overturn Roe v. Wade. While he says states should have the decision for abortion access, his platform also believes that the 14th Amendment provides protection to an unborn fetus, thus muddying if he really believes states should have a say or if he believes the Constitution already protects against abortion.
What would be some of the consequences of abortion bans and restrictions? And who are the people most affected by these consequences?
Yeah, so right now, as a result of the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, this is really a state-by-state issue. And so here in Colorado, where the right to abortion is pretty strongly protected, and actually even stronger protections, adding protections to our state constitution, will be on the ballot this November. So here, I think one of the main impacts has been that a lot of pregnant folks who cannot now access reproductive health care in their own state are traveling here to Colorado to access that care where it is available to them. And that's something that has really stretched resources at our clinics and created longer waiting times, both for in-state and out-of-state patients who may be traveling here. So I think within Colorado right now, that's the biggest impact we're seeing. In those other states, of course, who is actually able to travel to obtain healthcare is going to be something that's determined along socioeconomic lines. Not everybody can afford to take time off work, buy a plane ticket, drive a long distance, right? And so they may be very limited in being able to travel to do that. And so that's going to have different impacts in different communities as a result of that. Now, Marshall mentioned this potential for fetal personhood being protected under the 14th Amendment. And that's something that is a legal theory by which theoretically, right, courts could find that if fetuses have personhood rights, then abortion could be banned nationwide by judicial fiat. I don't think it's something that's immediately going to happen, but I think Democrats, to the extent that they are concerned about this, really need to be focused on court reform because, and this is one of those pieces of sort of misinformation that I've seen online a lot, is from people saying, well, Roe v. Wade got overturned during the Biden administration. So is that something that Biden supported? The answer is no. The reason that happened is because of justices that Trump appointed to the Supreme Court during his presidency. And that's something he's very happy to take credit for. You saw that in the debate. But going forward, whoever is elected president is going to be appointing justices, not just to the Supreme Court, but judges to the federal bench. And if Democrats are concerned about some of these more fringe legal theories like fetal personhood taking hold, they need to be really thinking about not just future appointments, but what might court reform look like. And I think that's something I haven't really seen a lot of discussion about from Harris. But I think it's something that could potentially be a major issue of a Harris administration should she be elected.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we didn't get to cover all the big topics or all the topics that you guys care about, but don't worry. We have y'all covered. DeMarco retrieves the wheel. We're calling this, which way do you want it? You want it this way, facing the camera? This is what we've deemed the prize wheel of politics.
The wheel of issues.
The wheel of issues. Well, sure, yes, issues. So what's the prize, you might ask? It's knowledge. It's knowledge. So each week on the Culture Report, every episode leading up to the election, we're going to make sure to spin the wheel, maybe talk about one or two of these issues just to make sure we're getting you guys prepared.
So get excited and tune in.
So get excited, yeah, tune in.
And continue doing your research.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you all for watching today's episode. We hope you learned a thing or two or three. And of course, there's always more to learn about the topics we briefly discussed today. So we encourage you to continue doing research on the issues that you care about. And as a reminder, don't forget to register to vote and check your registration online.
And thank you guys so much for joining us and educating everybody. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you guys for joining us. We'll be back to continue the conversation right here on 9 News Plus and 9news.com.